Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Board of Adjustments for November 20th, 2019. I have a little preamble here. The City of Tempe Board of Adjustment is authorized by the Arizona Revised Statutes and the City of Tempe Zoning Ordinance. Its function is to grant relief where literal enforcement of the zoning ordinance would result in an unnecessary property hardship, to interpret provisions of the zoning ordinance for variances, and to hear appeals from any person or city official aggrieved by the decision of a person responsible for the enforcement of the zoning ordinance, such as a zoning administrator or hearing officer. This word is odd. I think we need to adjust that. The board has the City of Tempe Community Development Staff summary reports on the items being considered at this meeting, and will use their reports in their deliberations. All applicants and interested citizens, when your request is called or when you wish to address the board, please make sure you have filled out one of the citizens' request forms located on the table by the doors. Then step to the microphone and state your name and city of residence, and please submit the form to a staff member before you begin speaking at the microphone. I'm going to take another stab at that because I want to use my own words. If you wish to speak on a case tonight, we can accommodate you. We have some forms over on that table. If you will fill one of those out and get it to staff, we can provide you with 3 minutes to make comment on the one case that we will be hearing tonight to that effect. All right, so having stated all that, let's do our introductions. We have a short board tonight. And Board of Adjustments, we typically allow you to introduce yourselves. So starting at my left, please.
Whitney Baker.
David Noggle.
I'm Chairman David Lyon.
Vice Chairman Jim Frazee.
Jack Confer.
Kevin Collins.
Okay. We also have with us Mr. Steve Abrahamson. We have Jonah Barry. We have Diana Kaminsky and Ryan Levesque with us from staff in audience as well. Sorry, I said, sorry, it's Brittany Nelson, not Jonah Barry. You know, every meeting I get one. I space one. My apologies, Brittany. All right, so our first item of business is the consideration of the year report. I am led to understand that this has been reviewed and there have not been any edits or comments made to that. Is that correct?
There are 2 errors that I see, but she might have already got them actually, because you mentioned that one of the attendance things was corrected for me. My date that I started was not 2014. It was the exact same date as Mr. Watson, 2/28/2018.
Okay. Any other corrections?
Just how many absents do you have from me for?
Four.
It should be 3.
Okay.
All right, sharp-eyed. Any other corrections? All right, so we'll take a motion on the approval of this report. Can I hear a motion to that effect, please?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Do I hear a second?
I second the motion.
And I am to assume your motion includes the edits proposed by Board Member Baker?
That is correct, thank you.
Okay, all those in favor by show of hands, please. And opposed, if any? I don't believe there are. Okay. So motion passes 6-0. Having taken care of that, we'll move on to our next case, which is Del Taco. So for Board of Adjustments, have we switched to having our applicant? Okay. We've gradually been migrating to this new process. So Ms. Sender, if you'd be good enough to tell us about your case.
Excuse me, prior to the sender beginning her discussion of the case, I'm sorry, did you go over the fact that there is a short board and you have to have a 4-0 vote? Thank you.
I did not, no. So as you are aware, and Mr. Abrahamson is reminding us, we only have 6 members on the board. You will need 4 affirmative votes for pass. If you wish to have us consider a continuance, that certainly is your right to ask for that.
Thank you. I think we'll go forward tonight. Thank you. Do we have a clicker here? Awesome.
Can you speak into the mic a
Yes,
little bit better?
is this mic on? The green light's on.
Thank you.
Sorry, I've had a cold since my kids started daycare, so you won't be able to hear a thing I say. Are you sure? Because there's a lot of slides. It doesn't work. Okay. Okay. No problem. Well, thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. My name is Darren Sender with Sender Associates. I'm here representing Kai Investments, who is the developer of the Del Taco we're looking at on the screen. They actually had their flight canceled, so they are not able to be here today. Weather in other states is just as bad as here, so they wanted me to tell you they were apologizing for not being here tonight, so we'll be here. I'm also here with our development design team with Todd Leslie, Quoc Trong, and Dev Power. These are the brains behind what you're going to see on the screen tonight, and the several iterations of this site plan that I will describe in a few minutes. I will apologize, my presentation is a little long and it's very technical. Variances are something that I really get into. I'm a little bit of a technical geek, so if I'm getting too much into it, I apologize. I know you probably want to get out of here, but I also kind of want to get into this a little bit just to show to you that we do meet the tests for variance, how we meet the tests for variance, and that we respectfully request your approval tonight of this variance request. We initially were requesting 3 parking space variance. We had a requirement for 27 parking spaces, and I just to start, and turns out that the measurement of the spaces, the way they measure for parking, is net, not gross. So we're actually asking for 2 parking spaces, not 3. So the variance is actually for 2 parking spaces instead of 3 parking spaces. With that said, we realized today that we can actually probably get it closer to 1, but we're going to have to ask for 2 tonight. We're within 5 square feet of asking for 1 parking space variance tonight. And it's that tight. You know, it's things are, you know, the way things are laid out is very tight. It's very well run, and things are there for a reason. So we are going to be asking for 2 parking space variance tonight instead of 3. So that's why I have my little asterisk on the screen there. Okay. Lots of words here. I'll try to. This is basically the reason why we're changing. The measurement was just off. Simple as that. Nothing changed on the building. Measurement was off. Using net floor area. We're also going to be requesting a DPR eventually we did request a DPR for this project. Will be heard in December, assuming you tonight will approve our variance. And we're also going to request a subdivision plat to plat all these 3 lots together. So that's on this screen as well. Okay, go ahead. Here's a site location. For those of you familiar with North Tempe, it's just north of the freeway on Scottsdale Road. Do you have you don't have a laser thing? Does that work? I've got one in my purse I might be able to grab. I'll have to do it like this though, right? I'll have to show it backwards. Okay, let me see if I can grab mine. Sorry, guys.
Of staff?
Yes.
Please.
I'm trying to find out, I want to follow along in the materials. Is the presentation in the materials, was that submitted beforehand? Okay, thank you.
It works now. Thank you. Is the red one the laser? Oh, there it is. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, so if you don't mind, I'll do it this way. Here's the property right here, southeast corner of Weber and Scottsdale Road. This is the new Hampton Inn and the Red Lion. The gas station's over here. There's a Bikini Beans over here. Strip center. Basically, all of this in this area up and down here is basically commercial development, and it's right at that corner. Here's a little bit closer in picture. So property comprises Lot 1, Lot 2, and Lot 64, right on the corner. Vacant lot here, convenience store, gas station, and then some commercial businesses over here, and some residential homes here and here. Context of the area is basically a mix of CSS commercial, PCC1, some industrial, and then the R2 multifamily zoning to the east. So basically the northeast, east, and the southeast is R2 multifamily zoning. Much of it's developed as single-family homes. Some of it's developed as was mentioned earlier, duplexes and maybe a triplex or two in there. I'm not sure. But there's quite a bit of commercial up and down this street, so that's the context. Again, a little bit clearer here. Everything in red here is basically developed, some type of commercial, whether it's the hotel or commercial center, gas stations, things like that. Over here, this is a lot of that county area. And then the zoning for the property, a lot of CSS zoning up on this strip, which is part of a plat. A lot of CSS, a lot of commercial, all up and down this street here, and even some industrial down there to the south. The property is part of a plat that was done in 1947, so at Lot 1, Lot 2, and Lot 64. You can see here, this is the 1947 plat. It was done, quite a while ago. I wasn't here to say it, but kind of see 1967. Just after the Jack in the Box was built, Jack in the Box took this portion, so it was just lots 1 and 2 in 1967. You can see a little clearer picture here. 1978 aerial shows it really well. This was the existing Jack in the Box. You can see the building. You can see the kind of the drive-through area, all of the parking, the refuse container, and then this is the alley that used to be there running through. And then this piece down here is our Lot 64 that we've included in with our site. And then 1997, aerial map shows that the Jack in the Box is gone. It was demoed in 1995. We've been working on this, this client has been working on this since 2017. Right around May of 2017, my client started site planning, looking at the site, trying to figure out the best site plan for it. We went through 5 site plan reviews in 2.5 years with staff, red line after red line, bled on the drawings, difficult process, but we ended up with a plan that works for everything except 2 parking spaces. And that's a heck of an accomplishment, and really kudos to my team because, making everything fit, refuse, fire, access, driveway widths, parking widths, handicap spaces, landscaping requirements, lot coverages, setbacks, all of that stuff works on this site. Just 2 parking spaces, and really just 1. But 2 parking spaces is all we're here asking for at this point. That's it. So you can kind of see on this, everything in blue are our site plan reviews and our formal submittal towards the bottom. And then the green stuff is like every time we revised our site plan and did a new one. At one point in 2017, we were potentially going to purchase, and we're in escrow to purchase the property to the east, Mr. Arcules' property to the east. We were thinking about purchasing that. We were in escrow for that. He was going to sell it. That was going to be part of our parking lot. But that escrow fell through. Another escrow opened up a year later or so. I think it was sometime in 2019, maybe May. Another escrow opened up. That one fell through. So we decided to just, do what we could on the site, on the property that we had in escrow, And lo and behold, it worked out again, but for these 2 parking spaces. So here's the site plan with an aerial. It shows, this is Weber, this is Scottsdale Road, this is Mr. Arcules' property next door, this is the alley that exists today. You can see we've got one access right here off of Weber entrance, another access here off of Scottsdale. Vehicles can either come in here and access the drive-through this way, or they can come in here and access the drive-through that way. Parking is along the south, east, central, and then 3 parallel spaces right here. Refuse right here, and believe it or not, all of that works. Refuse is signed off on it, fire is signed off on it. It just all works together, again, but for those spaces. And I'll go through and explain to you how a lot of constraints and circumstances led us to this site plan.
Ms. Sender,
Yes,
sorry, may I interrupt?
sure.
Is this the plan that now only requires the variance of 2 spaces?
Nothing changed on the plan. We just had measured the building incorrectly, the
Oh, I
floor
see.
area.
I see, okay.
We were using gross.
So the requirement number changed.
Yes, the requirement number, good point. The requirement number went from 27 to 26. So we're required to have 26 parking spaces, we have 24. So it was, yeah, basically it said it was a 2,053 floor plan, and everyone just assumed it was 2,053 square feet, and then we measured it, and we're like, oh, that was just a name on the plan, so, yes. And I'll go through our circumstances for you in a few minutes, but really this is the one site plan that works for everything but those parking spaces. I don't know if you can read this. I had them clean it up a little bit, kind of take everything off of there, but it's really hard to read. I apologize for that. You can see a little bit more on the landscape plan. I did the coloring on that, so don't blame the landscape architect. I just wanted to color it so you can kind of see what was going on. Obviously a wide buffer of landscaping along Weber, along Scottsdale Road, required 6-foot landscaping here as well. And we actually have space to add 2 more trees right in here between these 2 parking spaces. So for purposes of the DPR, when we go to the DRC, we can add those two trees in there to create that more buffer that a couple of the neighbors had asked us to do. Let's see here. So I'm sure you're aware of this, and I know you had a few cases recently on variances, but variances are statutory in Arizona. It's by statute. The state says these are the requirements that you must meet to get a variance approved in a city. And I'm not going to read all this to you. You're probably well aware of it. The city then takes that statute and they reiterate it in their zoning ordinance. So the Tempe zoning ordinance approval criteria for the variance, like we're here today, says that special circumstances are applicable to the property, including its size, shape, topography, location, or surroundings. Strict application of the code will deprive such property of privileges enjoyed by other property of the same classification, same zoning district. Adjustment authorized shall not constitute a grant of special privileges inconsistent. I won't read all of it to you, I apologize. But ultimately, it may not be self-imposed either. So these are the standard requirements in Tempe for a variance to be granted. So starting with that, we're going to start with the special circumstances applicable to the property. This is my biggest part of the presentation, so if you see me going on long, just know the end is near, I promise. This variance request, actually, we found about 8 special circumstances that each on its own probably could support a variance of 1 or 2 parking spaces on this site. But combined together, all of them more than justify a 2-space parking variance on this property. So combining all these together, we feel that this meets the tests. The first thing we have here is it's a small size and it's a narrow shape. There's reasons for this. It's just 22,000 square feet, just under about half an acre, just 0.51 acre, so a little, just over half an acre. The long, narrow shape, it made it difficult. The size made it difficult. 2.5 years we spent, like I said, Some of the things Del Taco didn't like. They didn't want us to do a certain driveway configuration at first. They said, oh, risk management's not going to approve this. And then they saw the site plan and said, we love the site plan, never mind. So there was a lot of back and forth with Del Taco, with the city. Lots of things didn't work at first, and we really had to work on the site plan and really, as a team, with our design team, figure out how to make it meet all of the requirements. Refuse configurations, parking lot standards, setbacks, circulation requirements, I mean, all of these things we had to really consider. Even grading and drainage, we had to consider. The size of the site was impacted by 2 takings of right-of-way. 22 feet was taken off the west side of these lots. So it was like 4,700 square feet was taken off of our site over the years. So the site got squished, it got narrowed, it got really small, and overall our site that we're looking at today ultimately lost 34% of its size. Lot number 1, which is right here, this lot right here, that lost 34%. Just of its lot. Overall was 18%. So it's the small size of the site is definitely a special circumstance, and it was something that we didn't create, we didn't do, and it ultimately resulted in a long and narrow site. Interestingly enough, the big black line that I drew on there represents the fact that this is a CSS site that's a standalone CSS site. A lot of these CSS commercial sites are part of shopping centers. So you'll see a Del Taco or Taco Bell or Wendy's or McDonald's in a shopping center sharing parking, sharing access, sharing driveways, a little bit more room to breathe. They can move around a little bit better. We don't have that here. We have a site that's standalone. We can't access to the east. There's a property there. There's an alley there. We can't access to the south. There's a building there. So, really we have a limited capability here to develop this property. So it's kind of reiterated here. Some of the restrictions that impacted were really the 23-foot driveway width, the 18.5 by 8.5 by 18 parking widths, the sidewalks, internal sidewalks we had to create, 20-foot special landscape setbacks, 6-foot landscape buffers, refuse trucks, fire truck requirements. So a lot of things that we had to fit on this smaller site. Big enough to do what we needed it to do, but it's definitely very small. Again, this is the only site plan that really works. The third special circumstance on this property is a required alley dedication on that purple section there. You can see these alleys. These alleys in the larger subdivision, this larger plat, it's called North Tempe subdivision. All of the alleys were dedicated in 1947, 16 feet wide. Over the years, the refuse trucks have gotten bigger. There were commercial properties to the south of us that actually have their refuse out in the alley. So the refuse trucks are coming in, picking up the refuse. Well, you can't do that anymore. Now it's on site. So our refuse is on site, and over the years, since the trucks have become so big, there used to be a wall right here, and the refuse trucks would have to come and turn like that. The wall came down over the years somehow, so it's torn down, fell down. So the actual refuse trucks were coming in here, picking up all the commercial refuse right in this area, coming in here and then turning across our property before we purchased it, turning across the property and exiting onto Scottsdale Road because they couldn't make that turn. They couldn't make the turn right here. The trucks the front loaders are just too big. So they were using our property. And then when they heard that, we're going to build something there and there's going to be a wall there now, they couldn't make that turn anymore. So we talked with Mike Ulmer, talked with actually 5 different departments requested that we dedicate additional property for that refuse turn for the alley. I think it was like land services, real estate, refuse, fire. I mean, all these different departments in our site plan review comments were saying you've got to dedicate 4 feet. And we said, the site's too small, we can't dedicate 4 feet. So they said, look, we'll go out there, we'll drive it, mark it up. They've done this before on projects. They actually drive it with the truck, mark up where the area is, and they figured out, okay, we just need 2 feet. We can accept 2 feet, we'll make it turn, it'll be fine. So we were required now to dedicate that purple area, which is 2 feet off of there, about 160 square feet, I believe, to bring the alley to 18 feet, which is what they said it would be appropriate. But, you know, looking at it, it shrinks the site a little bit more. You know, another special circumstance that, you know, kind of out of our control, but makes the site even smaller, that, you know, impacts the site plan, impacts where we can put the parking, and ultimately where or how many parking spaces we can have. This one's an interesting one. There are deed restrictions on this plat, in this platted area. It's not on the plat, but it's in the area. It's on the deeds of the properties. Lot 2, which is there in kind of orange, I guess, has a restriction on it. It's designated in the deed restrictions for this area as a residential property. It says you can't build any commercial buildings there. Okay, so so now we have a very, very unique circumstance here where we can't put the building over there. We can't put the building at all on that brown area. We could park on it. We can put other stuff on it, like what we have there. You know, we can put the parking on it. We can put the driveway on it. You know, we cannot drive the cars on it, but we can't put the building there. So that wiped out almost a third of our site. Again, a special circumstance we did not create. So the 16 lots up and down Scottsdale Road that are designated commercial, our Lot 1 and Lot 64 are designated commercial, but by themselves aren't big enough to really do anything with. So that was another special circumstance that drove our site planning process. It drove that building over to the west or over to the south. And we had several, I mean, we went through 5 site plan reviews with staff. We went through, you know, probably 30 site plans internally, trying to figure out how to make all of this work. So, you know, we definitely, that was definitely a big special circumstance that applying to the property really made an impact on where we could lay that building out, where we could lay out the parking, where we could lay out the landscaping, the lot coverages, or I'm sorry, the landscaping requirements, and everything else. Let's see. So again, this current site plan, taken into context with all of the special circumstances, again, is the only site plan that makes it work. The 5th special circumstance applying to the property is there's a public utility easement, 16 foot wide in that purple area, running through east-west. Can't put a building there, can't put trees in there. Again, significantly restricts where we can put the building. We looked at, you know, at one point putting the building down here because we couldn't put it up here in Lot 2. Can't do that. There was no way to do that as a drive-through. There was no way to do that. It would just simply did not work. Significantly restricts the developable area of the site. And again, the only location we ended up with that on this site that works is the building where it's at. Another thing that came as a little bit of a surprise to us towards the end of our planning process was it turns out the plat is inaccurate. The original 1947 plat is about 2 feet off across the plat or so. Our civil engineer surveyor, we did a couple of Alta surveys on it, and it appears that our property is 1.66 feet less wide than we thought it was. So, you know, all of these things start accumulating, and another special circumstance that we did not create that applies to the property is that, you know, we're losing land area on paper that we thought we had. I don't think the property itself is, I don't understand how it works. We had a big discussion with the civil and with land services at the city. It's just the way it was measured is off. And we had our original Alta survey at 103.55, and the city had it, because, I guess the way it was measured at 101.89, which was a 1.66 foot difference. So now we're talking about, you know, another 1.5 feet on top of the 2 feet, on top of the 22 feet that was taken. So a lot of these things, and especially this started really impacting where we could put this building and the parking, the landscaping, and everything. Another impact was bus shelter dedication. The city looks small, but the city required that we place a bus shelter pad in this green area. What that does, and the impact of that, is we're not allowed to utilize a 0-foot setback that other CSS properties can use. CSS zoning has a 0-foot setback. We could put the building all the way up to the property lines on those two sides and, you know, make some more room. Well, we can't do that here. We've got, I don't know, it's 3 or 4 feet or so where that green area is that we have to dedicate for a new bus shelter, which is great because people are going to be able to have a nice shelter right outside our business, and ultimately, you know, hopefully come and have some tacos while they're waiting for the bus. But it did impact the site layout, did impact the ultimate site plan, resulting in what we have here today. And then the 8th special circumstance applying to the property has to do with those Scottsdale right-of-way takings. I don't know if you can see, yeah, you can see that. The gray area, all of this gray area here was taken from Lot 1 and Lot 64. I believe 1953 and 1993, 2 different takings. Ultimately, it was 22 feet wide and about 4,756 square feet was taken from the property. Again, as I mentioned earlier, Lot 1 lost 34% of its area. And what's unusual about this too, even though this was taken kind of a little bit up and down the street, there was definitely some takings on other properties up and down the street. This area here was an additional about 400 square foot taking on that corner. Not all properties on Scottsdale Road in our platted subdivision were taken this much. There's still quite a few that don't match our property line. They jut out into the right-of-way a little bit. So the property just to the south, in fact, is 5 feet over their property line right here, sticks out 5 feet further. They were taken, you know, 5 feet less than us over the years. So, you know, definitely a significant impact to our property. That doesn't apply to all of the properties equally across the area. And this significantly limited the properties. Lot 1 was basically rendered useless. I mean, it's you know, very, very small. I think it ended up being, you know, 9,000 square feet. Developing that as a CSS property would be almost impossible by itself. So, you know, the impact on our site with these 3 lots was significant. So showing you these all in context, again, the cumulative effects. I think all of these special circumstances applying to the property individually probably would result in a justification for a variance. I believe they would. But when we start taking these into context, you know, the small size, the narrow shape, the alley dedication, the deed restriction, the PUE, the inaccurate plat, which kind of scrunched the site, the bus shelter dedication, and then the right-of-way takings really impacted where we could lay this site out. It really, really drew us to this site plan and where we're at today, and our 2-space parking variance. I will tell you, I forgot to mention the PUE is a result of an alley abandonment that happened in 1993. The city retained a public utility easement because there's utilities in that area. So they retained that PUE. There's lots of stuff in there. I don't know what, but there's stuff in there. Okay, so we're hitting the high part. Second test that we have to meet under the statute and the city ordinance is that we have to meet the requirement that strict application of this code will deprive such property privileges enjoyed by other properties of the same classification in the same zoning district. Basically, what they're saying is that, you know, you're going to have some hardship here if we don't give you some relief. And that's what variances are for. Variances are here to provide some relief when you've got something that otherwise fits and is otherwise allowed. Restaurants are allowed in CSS by right. They're fine. We can put a restaurant in. Drive-throughs are allowed just with a use permit. Technically, they're allowed by right, just with heightened standards. They have a little bit bigger setbacks and things like that that we had to adhere to for the drive-through and the parking areas. But they're generally allowed in the CSS zoning district. So the small size and the unique shape, the takings, the dedications, all of these things that we have on our site don't generally happen on all of these other sites in our general area. The other properties up and down Scottsdale Road don't have the PUE. They don't have the same deed restriction that we do on our property. They don't have the same, alley dedication requirement. There's a lot of these circumstances that don't apply to those properties, nor to any properties north, west, or west of us. Of the 14 other CSS zone parcels on Scottsdale Road up and down, none of them dedicated any additional land for the alley. None of them were required to dedicate anything for bus shelter like we were. Several didn't dedicate that full 22 feet like we did. Lot 63 to our south, lot 53 and 52 didn't. So that's quite a few. Most of them don't have a PUE on them restricting where you can put the building. Most of them don't have a deed restriction limiting a commercial building. And some of them may not even be impacted by the inaccurate plat dimension, depending on what their ALTA survey says. So the strict application of the code, in this case, meaning you have to have 26 parking spaces, would single out this site that has so many hardships, and it would deprive it of the privileges enjoyed by other non-encumbered properties in the CSS zoning district. Again, a lot of these CSS properties are part of bigger shopping centers. They typically would have ability to cross-park or to access and have some relief for these standards. That relief we don't have. That's what we're asking from you today, is the relief through the variance process. Again, we think that the strict application of the code would deprive our client of this. And we also agree with what was stated in the staff report. You've all had that. The properties to the south of us are grandfathered. A lot of those properties those buildings, those site layouts that could not be built today. Not at all. A lot of them also, they're disproportionately large for their sites. The site lot coverages are significant. Again, could not probably, in most cases, be built today under the current zoning ordinance. And then ultimately, a lot of, as the staff report points out, a lot of these existing buildings on the properties to our south that are within a similar area to us, they can take advantage of the adaptive reuse program. We don't have any buildings on our property. They were torn down years and years ago, 1996. So our circumstances, our situation is significantly different from the properties surrounding us. We do feel that the strict application of this code would deprive our property of privileges enjoyed by other properties of the same class and same zoning district in our area. The third test we have to meet is that the adjustment shall not constitute a grant of special privileges. You're not giving us something special, inconsistent with what other properties have to do in the same, again, vicinity and zone which our property is located. Granting this variance will ensure the site is developed consistently with the surrounding area. It's commercial. There was a Jack in the Box on this property, drive-through Jack in the Box on this property for years. We're asking for a drive-through Del Taco on this property. Again, the prevailing character of development is commercial. There's retail, there's drive-throughs. Again, a lot of commercial here. The context, it's nothing unusual. It's 1 or 2 parking spaces ultimately for a restaurant that is allowed ultimately under the zoning ordinance. And again, in the staff report, there were a lot of really good points as well. The development code offers solutions by variance. That's what we're asking for. We're asking for this relief for these 2 spaces. The same limitations apply to vacant lots, so we can redevelop. And adjustments, reduces the amount. It's not a privilege. It's a necessity to comply with the codes. So again, 2 parking spaces. And again, existing grandfathered sites and adaptive reuse opportunities, we don't have those opportunities here. So we feel that if you do approve this variance for us today, which I certainly hope you do, it would not constitute a grant of special privileges that is inconsistent with the limitations and on other properties in our same zone in their area. Now, this one is the last, number 4. The variance can't be granted if the special circumstances that I just mentioned earlier were self-imposed by us. You know, we can't have created the problem and then say, hey, city, can you help us out? And that's an important one. And this one, we come across it a lot. We've done a lot of these variances in a lot of cities. I sat on the Board of Adjustment for, I think, 7 years in Tempe here. So I've been in your seats. I know how hard it is. I know how fun this is. And thank you for your time, because I know it's very time-consuming. But you know, we talked to a lot of people about variances in many, many cities. And self-imposed by the applicant is something that comes up a lot. And we have to remember that it's the special circumstance can't be self-imposed, not the request. So there was a recent Arizona Supreme Court case that clarified this for everybody, and we're thrilled that it's been clarified, because we've all said this for years, but now the Supreme Court's saying it, and very unlikely to be overturned when the Supreme Court of Arizona makes a decision like this. But they have stated special circumstances are not self-imposed when the owner wants to use the property in a way permitted to other similar situated properties, but it cannot do so because of externally imposed circumstances, like those included here, which is another case. It's not that we want to do a drive-through. It's not that we want to do a drive-through of this size. It's not that we want to do something on these properties that causes a problem. That's not self-imposed. What they're saying is something like, well, what if we split the lot and made it really, really small and just wanted to develop a part of it? Or what if we did something to make all these special circumstances? What if we petitioned the city and said, take our property, go ahead and take that 22 feet? We didn't do any of that. So it's the special circumstances. It's the size, the shape, the dedication, the deed restriction, the PUE, the plat issue, the bus shelter, and the Scottsdale road takings. Those are what we talk about when we talk about self-imposed, and we did not cause any of those. Again, I won't go over all of these. I won't go through all these right now. I'll get to these in a second. Again, buying property with knowledge that the development might require a variance, that does not make it self-imposed. Proposing a development or use that may require a variance, again, does not make the special circumstances self-imposed. The act of requesting the variance, I've actually had people tell me this. I had a planning director in another city say, well, you're asking for a variance, you're self-imposing this. I didn't know what to say. I said, but that's the relief valve for the zoning ordinance. That's the request that you have to make. It's the circumstances that we're talking about here. Those are the ones that you can't self-impose. And again, we review the special circumstances to determine that whether they are self-imposed, not the development, site layout, or development standard requested in the variance. The above mentioned 8 special circumstances that I talk about today, again, were not self-imposed by the applicant, and we feel very strongly that we meet this test, as well as the other 3 tests of a variance. This is the case, and I'll go through it very quickly, but it just struck me because it came out in 2017, and there's cases out there that take bites at this variance stuff. You know, people will file a lawsuit, and the Arizona appellate courts will make a decision, and a little bit here and a little bit there, but the way that people that practice in this area, we've always felt that variances are looked at a certain way. This decision by the Supreme Court of Arizona really clarified that for us, and it struck me as funny because, not funny, but struck me as unusual because it really dovetailed with what we're asking for here. The holding of that case, what the court said there was special circumstances existed justifying approval of a variance when the property owner requested an area variance to reduce a separation requirement when eminent domain happened, which is similar to our right-of-way takings, that reduced the size of the lot, caused less frontage, reduced the parking, and limited its commercial viability as a developable lot. Sounds a heck of a lot like what we have going on here. The court then said the special circumstances were not self-imposed by the applicant, but were created in part by growth in the city itself. The Phoenix Board of Adjustment stated that, and the court felt it important enough to reiterate it in its opinion, which is very, very odd. It's good. It's a good thing. It means the Board of Adjustment was doing its job. Purchasing property that may require a variance to develop does not mean the circumstances were imposed. Special circumstances were self-imposed. That's kind of the crux of this case, the two things that the special circumstances and self-imposed. It clarified a lot of things for us. The similarities are that it was an eminent domain that made the site smaller, less frontage setback issues, reduced areas for parking. In our case, we've got a lot of things, but we also have a right-of-way taking, very similar. In the case, Pond First case, there was a prior non-conforming use on the lot. In our case, there was a prior non-conforming use on the lot. In the Pond First case, there were overall special circumstances that were not seen in other lots in the area. They were dissimilar to other lots in the general area. In our case, most of, or all of our special circumstances, again, are not seen on other lots in the area. Very similar. In Pond First, they asked for an area variance, which is any technical variance. Setbacks, parking, height, they don't do density, but technical stuff like that. That's what we're asking for here. They specifically stated in that case, a decision regarding the number of parking spaces for a use permitted in a particular district, such as a restaurant, would require an area variance because it would not produce the type of neighborhood-altering impact that requires legislative approval, which is a different type of variance. It's called a use variance, and those are legislative. Long story with that, long history with those. But again, we're requesting a restaurant. We're requesting an area variance, and it's got a lower standard of review according to the Arizona Supreme Court because it doesn't produce the type of neighborhood-altering impacts that would have to go to City Council. Again, very similar to what we're asking for here. And I'll finish this up. I know it's getting a little long, and probably your eyes are starting to roll. Sorry. But the important statements, the court said that the record supports the Board of Adjustment finding that the lot size, building limited setback, and the parking restrictions do constitute special circumstances justifying the area variance because the property's unique characteristics create exceptional practical difficulties. Again, very similar to what we're talking about here. It distinguished some prior cases that's all we had to go on before. It distinguished those. It said, no, those are different. Those don't apply here. It said those cases, the owner created the special circumstances. They didn't arise, like in our case, from applying the ordinance to conditions and circumstances that the applicant did not create beyond their control. Again, very similar to here. The city's eminent domain action, not the applicant's intended use, altered the property's dimensions and created those special circumstances, including the onerous parking restrictions. Again, I just couldn't believe how close this was to what we're talking about here. And again, the characteristics and the strict application of the zoning regulations uniquely diminish the property's commercial viability as compared to other properties of the same classifications, and have nothing to do with just a personal preference, which was a different standard for a different issue. And they specifically stated special circumstances are not self-imposed when the owner wants to use the property in a way permitted to other similar situated properties, but can't do so because of these circumstances. And I just kind of repeat the same thing there about the similarities of this case. So I apologize. I usually don't quote court cases in these presentations, but this one was so just on point. It really struck me. So apologize, you're my first. You got to sit through that. So thank you very much. We do have one question about a stipulation. Because we've reduced, just by chance, the variance request to 2 spaces, the stipulation, I think it's number 1, 2, was meant, as I understand it, was meant to, let's see, you know which one that is? Oh, 2B. it says a minimum of 150 square feet. What they wanted us to do is the staff wanted us to get it down to two parking space variance in this stipulation. So because we're there, we request that 2B be stricken. They were looking for that to be, to get it down to 2 parking spaces. So we just happened to luck out and find that the gross calculation is different than the net, and it's down to actually 1, but because construction, there might be a little closet and something maybe has to bump out. We're 5 square feet over or under for needing 2 spaces, just 5 square feet. So we could ask for 1, but if that 5 square feet found its way back into the building somewhere, maybe a door had to pop out or a closet got bigger or something, we'd be right back here. So I'm having to ask for 2 today, just in case that possibility exists. But in terms of the real practical implications here, 26 parking spaces, we're asking for 2 less, 24 parking spaces. It's a drive-through use that has much higher drive-through usage than they do parking spaces. Approximately 5 employees on site. Many of them do take alternative transportation. There's a bus stop right outside the door. And again, it's directly north of downtown Tempe, which has exceptional transit. Employees can jump right on light rail, jump on the bus for a mile, and go right there, or even walk on a nice day. So those parking spaces are negligible. There may be a manager popping in and out, so it might be 6 at certain times of day. There's very, very little impact on the neighborhood. Right? We don't see that 2 parking spaces, people parking up and down the street because of that. We think that a significant amount of people that it will be coming to this Del Taco, and I neglected to mention, this is a new Del Taco. They're doing all fresh menu. This is a big deal for Del Taco. It's fresh foods cut on site, made fresh to order on site, and they're using the Beyond Meat product, and they keep prices down. So this can be an affordable option for the workforce. Anyone obviously can go there, but they want to make sure that's affordable for citizens and people who otherwise couldn't go out to dinner or go out and spend a lot of money, but still need somewhere to eat, either on their way to work, after work, whatever. It's a critical mission of theirs to make sure that this price point stays down and it's affordable for everybody, but still being this fresh menu that has some pretty cool new items. And this is a new prototype. It's the smallest prototype, smallest building they have. And the architect, I worked with him quite a bit. The reason we can't just shrink down the building to get rid of these couple parking spaces is because everything inside, there's storage containers, they have to have enough food on site between deliveries so they can make the food and not run out. They have to have certain health code requirements so that food isn't next to the bathroom or something. There's a lot of requirements internally. There's ADA requirements that they have to meet internally in the dining room, so they can people can walk through the dining room and access through there. There's ingress-egress requirements. There's doors that have to be in there that take up floor space. You can't put a seat there. So all of this is literally to the nth degree. This is as small as it can get and still operate well, and still provide the service and the food at the prices that they need to make it happen. So that's why, just saying lop off a part of the building, it's not that simple. I wish it was, because we wouldn't all be here tonight. It's a wonderful product, a wonderful company, and my client is a franchisee with a great relationship with the company, and just eager and ready to go and make this happen. So I don't know if staff, you want to talk about the stipulation, or if it's, oh, that's right, you haven't presented yet. Okay, thank you. So anyway, I would love to reserve a little bit of time for rebuttal if there's anyone speaking on this tonight, and if you have any questions, I would love to answer them.
Okay, you will, of course, have time to respond to any comments that we hear from the public. In the meantime, Board, do we have any questions for Ms. Sender? And I will say, at our last meeting, we were a little uncharacteristically quiet. And I think we should try and reverse that trend, be more vocal and speak more opinions and ask more questions. So please don't be shy. Vice Chair Frazee, please.
Thank you. Sorry, a couple questions in regards to, just for clarification. So the comment is that the applicant has been working on this since 2017. The owner, your client, purchased the property this year. So were they also the applicant? They just recently purchased the property?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Board Member Frazee, yes. They were the applicant in all of those site plan reviews. They just didn't own it yet. They were working on a purchase agreement at various points of that time, but yeah.
Okay, and so their purchase, as you're referencing, going back to the, different court cases, so their purchase was made while they knew the variance was still going to be needed.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions for our applicant? Board Member Confer.
Thank you. Ms. Sender, correct? The stipulation that you referred to by reducing from 3 to 2 spaces, have you vetted that through the city staff? Do you have to submit a new application that states, and was that done?
Mr. Chair, Board Member Confer, I don't believe we have to submit anything new because we're reducing our request. If we were asking for more parking spaces to vary, we would have to submit a new request. But since we're asking for less than what we asked for originally, we don't have to, as far as I understand. And we just today, yeah, Dinah will address it, I guess, but we just today kind of found all these numbers out. So we just mentioned it to them. So we do not have to submit a new application.
I appreciate your presentation. Thank you. It's very detailed. There's a lot of information in there. Ancillary comment. I wish you would have submitted all that so that we could have reviewed it before this meeting, because this is not adequate time to review all that information.
Yeah, I do apologize, Mr. Chair, Board Member Comfer. I actually finished all of that 2 hours ago, so I apologize for that.
All right, other questions? Vice Chair Frazee.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question. So in regards to the site plan and so forth, when you're looking at the flow, I don't know if you can go back to some of the to the site plan itself. I mean, that's even fine too.
Okay.
So the intention is that if you're going north on Scottsdale Road, you would enter the property from that very first arrow on the south side.
Yes, you can enter from here on Scottsdale Road. Yes.
If you miss that entryway, you would go up to Weber, turn right, and then turn right into the property, continue south, and then go through the drive-through.
Correct. Yes, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair.
And is that gone through, I mean, is traffic's okay with that as far as the design and the flow on that? There's also reference in the comments that by design, all parking's to be on site. Are there no parking signs along Weber?
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair Confer, I'm not sure if there's no parking on, okay.
Okay, that'll be addressed. Okay, all right,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'm going to ask a question just to cut one off at the pass. You mentioned the risk management assessment of the drive-through being in between the parking and the building. On Development Review Commission, we see that all the time. Almost every drive-through restaurant in our city has exactly that. But the question is being raised. Would you like to address how risk management feels about that situation?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Absolutely. We've worked very closely with Del Taco on this and their risk manager, their corporate office. And what the problem was initially, I can't think of a site right now to refer to, but initially the building, we tried a site plan where the building was here and it didn't work. And the drive-through was adjacent to the building, and people were actually entering the building through the middle of the drive-through. So basically, you do your order, and then you drive straight ahead, and someone could be walking in front of you. They didn't love that. It happens a lot, but they didn't like that. So what we did is when the building ended up here, ultimately the only place we could put it, this is now where people are crossing. There's a crossing there, there's a stop sign there. You're not moving, you're stopped at that point, you've gotten your food, and you're not actually, driving through the center lane. So it's a much safer location for people to cross than having it mid-queuing lane, like the other plan does, and some other drive-throughs have. A lot of them have it. I think what is it, it's at Priest and Broadway, northeast corner, I think it's a Jack in the Box there, has that circumstance. So we have the ability here to mitigate that and put signs up and crosswalk signs and maybe even a bump or something like that to mitigate that from having a potential impact on the pedestrians.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Collins.
I do have a follow-up question, because it is one of the comments that was submitted as well, and you kind of addressed it there, but, so if you parked in those ADA spaces, which are 2 of them, and could you kind of guide us through what the route is to go from there to enter the restaurant once you park in the ADA spaces?
Sure. And you can tell me if I'm wrong, but on these ADA spaces here, you can enter, this is a sidewalk that runs along all the way here. So you can enter the sidewalk and then just cross right into the building this way. The closest space is to the main entrance.
So that's the point where you said you could add signs, but your plan doesn't currently include having any kind of signage or that there?
Mr. Chair, Board Member Collins, we can, and certainly something, site plan doesn't get that fine grain, but it's absolutely something we've talked about internally, for sure, and something we can talk to staff about for the development plan review side of things, absolutely.
Thank you. And I do also thank you. It was a very detailed presentation with
A little long,
the extra information is very helpful.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Board Member Baker.
So again, to reiterate, I understand we're not here for your use permit, and I get that. But I did notice something very interesting in the very beginning of your presentation, which was a beautiful presentation, by the way. I found it extremely informative. Your client was apparently looking at the lot directly next to it. And that was obviously, that would have been wonderful. That would have taken away the need for all of this, right? Yet we have from that exact same lot owner, and maybe this would be more information from you objecting to this. And I find that interesting, maybe even a little biased opinion or something going on there, that they feel like this has been rushed. So it sounds to me from what I'm reading that we've gone through our meetings, our required neighborhood meetings. And I don't see in any of this documentation where any neighborhood person said, I have a problem with your parking. Am I incorrect in that analysis, or am I correct?
Mr. Chair, Board Member Baker, you're correct. You're
Okay,
correct.
thank
And-
you.
And I did neglect to mention that the Darlene Justice of North Tempe and Lane Caraway from Cavalier Homes, obviously very embedded neighborhood activists and boy, people that really keep a watch on the area for sure and are really watching out for things, both in support of this project. And both came to the neighborhood meeting, both are very much in support. Darlene couldn't be here tonight, she's coming to the DPR hearing, she's having surgery today, and then Lane, with the weather, he definitely was going to be here, but he's not. So we do, again, but to your point, no, you're absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you. Again, this isn't a use permit hearing, so I think that's important that we keep focused on that, of what we're really trying to assess.
Here, here. All right, other comments, questions? Thank you, Ms. Sender.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Kaminsky.
Good evening, board members. Diana Kaminsky, City of Tempe, Senior Planner with Planning. Do I get a clicker? Okay. Is it, it's on or off? Okay. And is the red button to forward? This one? Okay. So the request before you, as you know, is for variance for a deviation in the required parking by code. And there is a future Development Review Commission request, as was mentioned earlier, and that's for the use permit for the drive-through and the development plan review, which would be for the design, the site plan, landscape plan, and elevation. So that's not part of the discussion tonight, but there is a scheduled meeting for that on December 10th, if you wish to continue and go see that presentation. To put this into context, I did a similar graphic in terms of the right-of-way dedications that are shown in yellow, the alley abandonment with the public utility easement, which is shown in light blue in the middle of the site between 64 and lots 1 and 2. It doesn't show up very well in this graphic, but the developable area is the area in gray, shown on lots 1 and 64. To note, the private deed restriction on Lot 2 as a residential lot only per the deed restrictions is not something that the city enforces. We recognize this through our zoning code as a commercially zoned property. So the CSS zoning is what's shown in red. This also shows the 2-foot alley easement, which was reduced from 4 feet to 2 feet through the process, and a 6-foot landscape buffer, which is required when it's adjacent to a single-family district or use. So that's what's shown there. The parking is shown highlighted here in the yellow. Again, with the blue area for the 2-foot easement to the alley, the wall would be set back into the property to allow that, and then the landscape buffer in green would be within that wall, but it allows for trees to be extended above the 8-foot wall for a buffer to the residents to the east. And this is showing the requirement for parking 27 spaces and the original request for 24 spaces. We do not typically do a measurement of the interior net area of a floor plan. We take the data that's provided by the applicant. In this case, we had 5 different site plans, and each time the building size changed, and I'll get into that a little bit. So, you know, the numbers changed, the parking requirements changed through the process, and so we wouldn't have caught the net area. I don't have CAD files. I have a PDF, and I have a printout, and I can use a scale and measure it off to the best of my ability, but we do rely on the applicant to provide that information to us. I wanted to provide this analysis to show what our current code requires. And the area that's shown in red are kind of the back of house areas. So that's your freezer area, your refrigerator, storeroom, kitchen area, not the office, I excluded that, but any of the back of house areas. And that area in red is 745 square feet. That back of house area by our code requires 10 parking spaces. But people aren't necessarily in the refrigerator. Right? They might go in and out of that as they're working in the kitchen. The plan also shows the interior seating area. And if you assume it's a 2-occupancy vehicle, then you would have parking for 25 with double occupancy for the seating of 50 inside. And I counted the spaces of seating in the dining room. Assuming some shifts with different numbers of employees, I didn't have the exact numbers for Del Taco. This was an assumption based on my experience working in fast food. That unless they used alternative modes of transportation, obviously there would be single occupants probably coming to this site, not likely to be carpooling if they're shift workers. So the code calculation of 1 parking space for 75 square feet of building area factors into the customer and employee parking demand. So in other words, this is supportive of what our code would require based on these numbers, and that's why we don't exclude the back of house areas. Our number has already been crunched and configured to include those back of house, but it shows how much of that space in this small restaurant is used by the employees. We did look at an alternative floor plan, and through the 5 site plan reviews that we did, which actually moved the building into different locations, changed floor plan configurations and sizes, I kept reiterating, you know, if you knocked out the walls and made these seating areas outside patio, you could even keep the footprint of the building, keep the roof overhead, just remove the walls. This outdoor seating area of approximately 279 square feet would get you the parking you need. So I tried to do the math to make it work, And basically, it's not removing any seating from the site. The difference is our code requirements are different when it's outdoor patio versus indoor dining with air-conditioned space. So this was just an evaluation to see, okay, what would it take to get down to the number of spaces they're able to fit on this site, and that's what it would take. So you can imagine what would happen, obviously, if you were to push these walls in and put the door back to accommodate those seating areas as part of the outdoor dining area. And our code requirement for outdoor patio is 1 parking space for every 150 square feet of patio, but we exclude the first 300. So you get kind of 300 square feet of patio free because we want to encourage outdoor dining and the activation of the outdoor space. Anything above that 300 then starts the ratio of 1 per 150. When it's brought inside, it's 1 per 75. So that's just the difference there. A lot of these were already gone over by the applicant. I'm going to summarize these here. The original lot in the combination of these 3 lots was 0.57 acres. That's prior to the 2 right-of-way dedications along the street front, leaving the site at 0.52 acres today. That was a reduction, including the dedication or the abandonment of the alley, which does have its own restrictions, but if you include the addition of that land from the alley that we abandoned, they lost 2,006 square feet of space on these 3 lots, and they need 459 square feet to fit those 3 parking spaces. We also required the dedication of a transit shelter along Scottsdale Road, then the deed restriction on Lot 2, and Lot 64 is similar in size and shape to the other lots, but as a vacant lot, it's held to today's standards, not the standards of 1964 or 1947, so it doesn't have the grandfathered conditions that the other properties have. The alley abandonment also has the restrictions that you can't have buildings on that area. The combination of the lots are relatively small. We also had the requirement for the dedication of the easement and the additional landscape buffer adjacent to the single-family area. It's located at a corner intersection, and there was a question about traffic engineering and their involvement. I think if I go back to the site, I have that here. Okay, so let's see. When traffic engineering looked at this, some of the original site plans had the buildings in different locations. They looked at a bunch of different locations. Because of the distance from this intersection with an arterial street, this driveway cannot be any closer to the intersection. It has to be here. Likewise, because of this intersection here and the transit stop here, they're limited to where this driveway can go, and it's a distance of, I think it's 100 to 150 feet before you get to an intersection. So they were told you have to have your driveway somewhere down in that area. So obviously that's another restriction on the property. The no parking issue, obviously we have a no parking requirement on any arterial. You've never seen cars parked on Scottsdale Road. There may be cars parked further down on Weber Drive, but again, because of the location of this in relationship to the intersection, traffic engineering said we can't allow cars to park here because you've got cars turning and it's not safe to have cars parked that close to the intersection. So there was a lot of discussions with traffic engineering about where their driveways could go and where parking could fit. Let's see. So we talked about the corner. The properties to the south benefit from the alley access, as was mentioned earlier. The commercial trash collection is no longer allowed to come through a residential alley the way it did in the past. All of the businesses to the south have the advantage, grandfathered in, of having the commercial truck, which is a different truck, come up the alley to serve them. But this property, which has always had on-site circulation for its own refuse on site, has to meet the current standards. So the applicant attempted 5 different site configurations over a 2-year period that we looked at this. They did reduce the building size to try to meet the parking requirements. They originally had a greater delta between the required and what they could provide, and they continued to work to try and get it down. Up until the point when they made their formal submittal, I wasn't sure whether they were going to need a variance. Through the entire process, I kept saying, if you can't get your parking to work, you're going to have to apply for a variance and you're going to have to justify it. I don't know whether we're going to be able to support that, but you've got to figure this out. We can't take a formal application without knowing if you're meeting the code or how you're going to fix this. Now, there aren't any topographical issues with the site, but this goes back to the criteria. It's an or, not an and. So when you look at the criteria for size, shape, location, and surroundings, it's meeting all of those criteria within that one requirement. And it's again, an or, not an and. So there's no topographical issues with it. The strict application of the code, the property to the south did not have right-of-way dedication taken, probably because it's grandfathered in. At some point, if they were to redevelop, that would become a requirement. If they were to demolish the building, we would require that. Most of the existing buildings have grandfathered conditions, and when I did an analysis of these buildings, the existing ones, with the square footage of those buildings and the lot size, they have a disproportionate building size to the area of their actual lot. And the parking configurations that they have would never meet today's standards from an ADA standpoint, from a landscape island standpoint, from a separation from the street. We now require 20 feet from the street or from the property line to where the parking can start. If you drive up Scottsdale Road or walk, I would suggest don't drive, and take a look at those buildings, you'll see that they don't meet the current standards, but they enjoy the benefits of the grandfathered conditions. So the strict application of the code, there's the no-build easement within this property along the public utility easement. And if we apply the code for all of the standards within the zoning code, then it is depriving this property of privileges that the other sites don't have to adhere to. And they are meeting all of the zoning code requirements with the exception of the parking spaces. The adjustment shall not constitute special privileges. The zoning code offers variance process to any of the property owners based on the conditions of their unique circumstances on their lot. So as any of these other lots develop, they may find themselves in a similar situation. But the adjustment is consistent with the application of our current code. So if you're not grandfathered in and you don't have the ability to use the adaptive reuse code, which encourages the reuse of old buildings as a vacant lot, then this is one of the applications that you would use the variance as part of a justification. It's not a special privilege to ask a commercial development to reduce their parking. Most commercial developments want as much parking as they can. In this case, it's a necessity to comply with our code. The variance cannot be granted because of special circumstances applicable to the property. Ms. Sender went over that. The site has remained vacant for 24 years, and it was a jack-in-the-box for 30 years before that. So when I look back at the history, I went through the aerial survey of this site and looked at how it was used and how it circulated, and I asked myself, why has it remained vacant for 24 years? There's probably some reasons, and those are the special circumstances that up till 2019 were somebody else's problem. And our refuse people didn't even realize the problem they had because we've had changes of staff over the years until we went through this site plan review process, and they said, wait a minute, you can't build a wall here. We're driving through this property to get to the back alley. So it was purchased in 2019. I was not aware of the efforts to try to acquire the lot to the east. I actually made that suggestion at one of our meetings. I said, have you guys looked at this lot this would really solve a lot of problems. Could you, and I think there might have been a mention that we're looking into it. That might have been the first site plan review that we went through, and that seemed like a natural solution to me. But I wasn't aware of the history of that. They did previously remove 347 square feet. We were recommending removal of another 150 square feet. And I will get to the conditions here in a little bit and talk about this recent change and how that might affect that condition. So they held a neighborhood meeting at the hotel that's to the north of the site. There were 2 nearby residents, an adjacent property owner, and 3 neighbors from within the area that attended. 2 people left without making comment. 2 people provided written comments that were provided in the report. The discussion included questions about the landscape buffer and the alley access, concerns about traffic, noise, hours of operation, and the location of the refuse enclosure. There was concern that the reduction in parking would create an overflow problem for parking on Weber, and there were questions about the existing declarations and restrictions from 1947 and concerns about the setbacks. And I did meet with Mr. Arcules several times, including an explanation of how we address setbacks in terms of what is the front yard setback, what is a street side setback, how our setbacks are administered through the zoning code. And so that was also discussed at the public meeting. We had received 6 letters in opposition to the project. They were not specific to the parking. And then there were multiple emails from a lot owner of number 3 in opposition, who has also requested a continuance for the variance for the parking. So we are recommending an approval of the variance, but only for 2 of the 3 spaces. And that was our recommendation before we realized that they had an error in their square footage. The applicant did review these and agreed to them, but I think that was before you came up with a new square footage. So the requirements of this variance would be that they have to get the use permit through the Development Review Commission. They would need to do the development plan review, and we wanted to add a sidewalk to the north side from Weber so people can walk from that side directly up to the patio and the entrance. There is already an entrance that serves the transit users on Scottsdale roads. We would ask for another street connection for pedestrians there. And then this minimum 150 square feet, again, we were working from the 2053 and trying to figure out how to get it down so that they weren't having to have a deviation of 3 spaces. So we're okay with removing that, but we do not have a site plan with the data that shows the modification, obviously. So we would require that that be provided before we take this to the DRC, so that we have not only the site plan and floor plan with the correct data on it, but a second diagram that shows very specifically how the interior was calculated to make sure. For us, it's from, the inside paint to the inside paint. In other jurisdictions, they take it to the center line of the structural wall, and so that, obviously adds a couple inches on either side of a structure. So we would want to receive that, but we're okay with removing 2B because we have the next condition, which is this would be a variance to approve a deviation of 2 spaces, to go from the requirement of 26 to 24, which is what they have available on site, and that there would be no on-street parking on Scottsdale, which is part of traffic engineering anyway, but this was to reiterate this. And then on Weber Drive, the site must fully park itself. We wouldn't expect people to be parking down Weber and walking back to this restaurant. So that's our recommendation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, board members, we did have a couple questions. Who's first? Board Member Baker, please.
Well, I think it's really reiterating one of the questions already asked that we wanted to ask you. As far as signage on Weber for no parking.
I would have to defer to traffic engineering on that. If they felt that it was necessary, it would be for the portion in front of this property.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Frazee?
Just a couple questions. So in regards to number 4, there shall be no on-street parking on Scottsdale or Weber for this development. So you can't, if you go, to the next lot over to the east of the subject property, you're not going to restrict parking there because that's part of the residential subdivision. So you can't know if somebody's parking in front of that lot and then walking into the restaurant. There's no way to monitor that.
That is, it would be something that somebody would have to document that they saw people regularly using that area and parking on the street instead of spaces. I think if the parking lot's regularly full and we start getting complaints, then we would have, code enforcement would be out observing things in the area. But yes, it would be hard to catch one individual person parking
Okay.
there.
There was a reference in the previous presentation. Was the old Jack in the Box a non-conforming use?
I don't know if I have an aerial, but if you, the Jack in the Box,
And I remember the Jack in the Box. I've been around for a while.
the Jack in the Box was here. It did not include this lot. So it was just this lot. The
Right.
refuse enclosure was here, and it had site circulation here. The differences were we didn't have the 20-foot setback for landscape here. It included all of this land here. So it was a larger lot, and we didn't have the same standards. I don't believe they had, when I looked back at some of the aerials, they also didn't have the landscape buffer on the east side, and I don't know that they had all of the required landscape parking islands. So the drawings were very hard to read. I tried to go back and see, but the way we did design approvals in the past is they would come in for a site plan, and we would say, your site plan is approved as long as you meet all the landscape conditions. and then the landscape conditions would be worked out somewhere down the road. We wouldn't necessarily have a document that showed the final plan. Right now, we require a lot more up front so that we have something on record. So I was looking at microfiche, but it did not appear that it would meet today's standards.
But it did have access drive-through off of Weber, in and
Yes.
out off of Weber.
Yes.
In regards to, so I guess in regards to the comments that are being made with the stipulation 2B, the request is that 2B is removed. You're saying staff is okay with that. But is there a requirement then to certify? I mean, somewhere between now and approval, is the applicant going to have to certify to the square footage on the site plan in order to justify the removal of that stipulation, and that this only needs 2 parking spaces to be removed?
Yes, because they have to go to the Development Review Commission for approval of the site plan, landscape plan, and elevations. That would include the floor plan, everything that they submit. And we would not recommend approval of their design if the design did not meet the standards of the code or through this variance process. So we would require them to update those drawings, and then we would also ask for an additional drawing that showed a diagram that clearly showed the square footage of each space within, so that we could see that the calculation was done properly.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? Board Member Confer.
So they don't have to submit a different application that specifies the correct number?
No, because this is a reduction from the original request. It would be the same if they were going for a building height increase and they came back and asked for less. You can always ask for less than, you just can't ask for more than.
Is it possible, since you don't have exact numbers you're dealing with, you're taking this off of plans, is it possible there's errors being made with parking space and spaces too, gross versus net?
No, because we don't really have gross and net unless you were counting the width of the painted stripe. Those are usually dimensioned to, between each space, inclusive of the 4-inch white strip. So I don't, I mean, we looked at the parking. In fact, Ryan and I were just looking at the ADA parking since it was brought up in study session, and what they used is a van accessible model that provides 2 ADA with an 8-foot space in between for egress. So they're actually over what's required by ADA, but taking that one space away doesn't get them anything because it's 8 feet, not 8.5. So they couldn't make that walkway an additional space.
Just for my education for the future, is there any enforcement? Does the city go out there at some point in time to building inspectors, then measure the actual building to make sure the square footage is correct and the parking spaces are done correctly?
Yes, there's 2 different processes that occur after an approval through entitlements, and that is planning plan check. So when the plans come in for construction documents, we have a planner who's on the building safety side who works closely with the building safety staff. They review the construction documents per the drawings that we've received and entitled, including all the conditions of approval, and they make sure that the dimensions on the plan match our code and the requirements. Likewise, when they get into the field, the inspectors are going to be inspecting footings. Now, whether or not they're taking a tape measure to the inside of the building, I don't know, because I'm not part of that team, but it has to match the construction documents. So the inspectors go out and do various inspections along the way.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, good questions. Any more? What's that?
I've got another question.
All right, Vice Chair Frazee.
Thank you. You asked us to ask questions for asking questions. I guess if you would just speak to the comments, but since this is all part of the application and then the comments that are made inside of what we received, from city and from staff, comments that were made in regards to the process being rushed, the staff being, I guess you could infer, holding hands for the applicant to get this right. Could you just speak to those?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
A 2-year process to me does not seem rushed. I actually didn't know about the other discussions that had occurred with the adjacent property owner. I actually, looking back at the meetings that I had with him, he reviewed the application, the formal application, before I had a chance to. He called and said, I want to see the documents. I said, they just came in. I have a folder on my desk. I haven't looked at it. He said, I'll be there in 10 minutes. And he showed up and he reviewed it before I had a chance to look at it. So we work with applicants to help them through a process. Yes, that is our role. I provide an objective analysis of the information that's provided. Sometimes the information changes through the process. We went through 5 site plan reviews, and it was a team of, solid waste and traffic engineering and all these other departments. And yes, there was conversations about the alley dedication. Originally, it was a 4-foot right-of-way. Then it was 2 foot of easement. That was an agreement that was made through the discussion process. Solid Waste went out and tried to make it work with making the turn. They got the truck to turn. They actually snagged the truck on some overhead power lines. And then I questioned how much deviation we could allow in the alley when it wasn't meeting the standards. So there was a lot of discussion back and forth. What wasn't shown was the full story of all the discussions with all the emails. So there were excerpts taken to paint a picture of this being rushed, but this was not a rushed project. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms.
Thank
Kaminsky.
you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the public comment section of our meeting, or at least for this case. As I said before, we can grant each person that wishes to speak 3 minutes. And I'll be timing that here. And when we get to those 3 minutes, I will kind of give you a, hey, hurry up, let's wrap it up. If you would respectfully then finish with 1 sentence, that would be appreciated. Otherwise, I may ask you, all right, hey, let's finish up. I have 3 cards here. If there is anyone else that wishes to speak, there are cards over here on this table. You may fill one out and get them to a member of city staff, and we can accommodate you. None of these cards have checked the I wish to speak case, I wish to speak box, but I suspect that you do in some cases. The one exception being Stacy Arcules. Do you wish me to read this, or would you prefer to speak? You wish to speak? Yes. Well, certainly you may. Please, if you'd come to the podium here. The one requirement, please state your name for the microphone so we record it, and we'll give you your 3 minutes.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Stacy Arcules. Thank you for allowing me to give you this information. My brother passed away a week ago, so forgive me. I'm only here when I should be mourning for many reasons, but I'll tell you one reason. I met a woman who has the lot next to ours. Her name is Mildred. She's an older woman. She's probably in her 80s, maybe her 90s. She's a widow, and she's taking care of her great-great-grandson, which I can only assume is a big job. I worry for his safety. I worry for her, and I worry for the safety of all the other kids in the neighborhood. You know the rest of all of this. I don't need to tell you, but I hope and pray for Mildred and the approximately 150 other families affected by Del Targo's parking issue that you do what I consider the right thing. Thank you for listening to me.
All right, thank you. We'd like to ask questions, if that's all right.
Please.
Board, I will have a question if you do not. Any questions from the board? Okay, so it's just going to be me, I guess, at least to start. If you're willing, I'd like you to tell us just a little bit more about how Del Taco is going to endanger these 150 residences.
Okay, when I've been at our lot, I've seen the children playing next door, and I'm worried that with the cars that would be coming, the increased traffic, that God forbid one of the children could be hurt.
All right. Okay. Well taken. Any other questions? It was just me, I guess. All right, then we will thank you, Ms. Arcules.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
All right, I have Jeremy Arcules. By the way, correct me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, please. I want to make sure I get that right. Okay. Come on up.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Arcules. Please bear with me. It's my first time at a City Tempe hearing. So our All right, I want to start by painting you guys a picture. Imagine you're pulling out of this proposed Del Taco layout. After having purchased your food, what is the first thing you guys do? You reach into your bag, of course, and assure yourself your food that you just ordered is all there, or grab a fry maybe, but before you know it, you're already pulling out and driving your car. This raises a risk for handicapped people. Signage will not alleviate this problem. This will potentially result, this proposed layout will inevitably result in an accident, leaving the city potentially liable and, of course, the respective franchisee owner. Well, now I want to read a letter or an email that I had sent in, and just to make it apparent the content of this. This is an objection to Variance 19004 to reduce parking. The 24-hour Del Taco drive-thru restaurant parking variance request is based upon what clearly is not an acceptable site plan for parking. The site plan shows a pathway for walking and ADA wheelchair access across a dangerous drive-thru queuing lane. Customers and vehicles are distracted as their eyes look down while they grab their purse or wallet and arrange and taste their recent food purchases. The applicant, the rep, Darren Sender, even herself said that this layout is tight. That means that there's not a lot of room for error. That means that will result in an accident. Even Del Taco themselves says risk management group does not allow a customer from the parking lot to cross the queuing lane and enter the store. The site plan contains numerous and other safety and circulation issues that are obvious and will extend the liability to the city of Tempe. I believe the applicant knows the site plans do not safely work, and their strategy was to act surprised at the design review committee. The plans misled the Board of Adjustment by suggesting that the current on-site parking will work. So the buck needs to stop at the BOA parking variance, the Board of Adjustment parking variance.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well spoken.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I'm so glad that you chose to be part of this process.
Thank you.
And I think you should be proud of yourself. Thank you for being here and for speaking up.
Thank you, sir.
Any questions?
And again, I'm going to second what he just said. I'm very happy you're here, and I really appreciate your passion for this.
Thank you, ma'am.
You set up a scenario for us. You painted a picture. In that picture, my only question is, are they pulling out onto the street, or are you more concerned about the pathway in the parking lot going to the building, or are you concerned about someone pulling onto the street?
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm concerned about the overall congestion that's going to be created, because myself, and I'm sure you guys have too, ladies and gentlemen have too, when parking lots get very, very congested, and especially in drive-thrus, there's a lot of people navigating, and then to add the handicap, I just think it's going to inevitably lead to an accident.
Thank you. You answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, board members? Well, I have one if you don't mind.
Yes.
So there's the issue with crossing the drive-through traffic, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought I heard you say numerous other safety issues. Would you mind illuminating what other things do you find concerning? What other safety issues?
It's not, so I mainly am concerned, my mother raised other concerns, but children they're at the same height as people in wheelchairs, if not lower. So this isn't just a risk for the handicapped community, it's a risk for the children of the community that are obviously going to be going to Del Taco. They're going to be walking from their homes and then crossing the lot, or someone could be leaving the lot. It's just it's the overall congestion. And Ms. Sender said, and this seems it's been exaggerated through the layout plans and everything, the lot size is tight. It's very tight, and there's not a lot of room for air anywhere, like for children, for handicapped people, so it just didn't seem safe in my opinion.
Okay. All right, I guess that's all the questions we have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, and that brings us to David Arcules.
Hi there. A lot of hearings going on today. My name's David Arcules. There's probably a lot of emails in there from me. And I put them in there because I'm going to do an analogy here, maybe a basketball game, where it's a shot clock, and I'm going, whoa, and all I'm asking for is a continuance, and I've got there's been multiple misrepresentations, and that's putting it lightly, that's happened. I didn't, Ms. Kaminsky said, 10 minutes, I'm coming down. I have an email chain which says, I said, fine, I'll wait. She said, I'd like to, I just received it, maybe you'd like to wait. And it was a few days, and then I came down, and there's an email chain to that. There's another discrepancy. There's no signage on Weber. There are people living on Weber. There's a woman who's 80 or 90, Mildred, and her husband was named Whitey, to give you how long she's been there. He worked at a car wash, and you can imagine why his name was Whitey. That's how long they've been residents. This is a Tempe subdivision. It's 100 and plus homes. That's the problem here. This city is abrogating with the subdivision restrictions with the plaintiff, or I'm sorry, with the applicant. It's just, and this has been so rushed, and there's so many. The applicant deleting my comments in a neighborhood meeting. And here's something else tonight. There was a person at the neighborhood meeting. She did write in a negative comment on Del Taco, and it's completely misrepresented here. They said there were no negative or comments. I know this is about parking, but it's about parking for a 24-hour Del Taco. And so, yes, yeah, we're absolutely looking for no variances. And then the Supreme Court case that Darren likes to hang her hat on specifically mentions negative character of the neighborhood. This neighborhood's improved. You have a letter from a new immigrant who moved in and got a Fannie Mae mortgage. I've actually been to his house. He was putting marble flooring in, and there was a little language barrier there, but he did write in specifically about parking. His wife has a young child in her hand while I was talking to him. These people are too busy even to come here. I mean, it's just, they're very busy people. They're working. They're not going to have time to say, oh, there's a car out front. There will be cars parked on front. The character area is not going down Scottsdale Road. It's the character area is North Tempe subdivision, which is deed restricted. And what you're doing by giving this applicant, if you did give this applicant a variance, you're going to switch the burden to the neighbors, which is not the intention of a variance. I've got.
Stop. I'm sorry.
Anyhow, there's no grandfather rights here. There was.
Oh, there it is. I really apologize. That's embarrassing.
Okay. There's CIA or Kai Investments. They're very sophisticated. They bought into this. They knew the problems. Darren wants to hang her hat on because you can't buy into a self-existing burden so long, which is she wants to hang her hat on this case, which is in there, is discussed, even disclosed. I'm trying to be fair. I even had a half apology to Darren Sender about the applicant switching names or whatever. There's misrepresentation. So I've asked in my emails for continuance because it's just like a shot clock on a basketball game, and there's no time for me to even get a traffic engineer to look at the plans and say, hey, what's wrong here? It's just, it's not right. It's not right that the city, this isn't just for this, but I find it very strange that the ordinance allows the applicant to take notes at a meeting. There were so many deleted items. You'll have an email in your packet there of all the deleted items that the applicant left out of the meeting.
All right,
Just
Mr.
a few.
Hercules, let's
Okay.
do this. Let's go to questions, because
Sure.
your time is up, but I actually have some
Absolutely.
questions, and we can keep
Okay.
talking by way of questions.
That'd be great.
All right. First, I defer to the rest of the board. Any questions for Mr. Hercules? Let's go to Board Member Collins first.
Thank you, what was your last name again, your pronunciation?
You can, Hercules, sir.
Hercules. I'm looking at the, one of the emails that you did submit, and it says one of the last pieces on here is that you would be inclined to accept a restaurant that was a sit-down restaurant, not a drive-through restaurant.
I believe that's not from me, that's from somebody
Oh,
else.
from another area,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, that's from a neighboring homeowner.
Oh, so some of the emails you submitted were not just from you, but from the
I didn't
neighbors as
submit
well?
that. That
Okay.
was directly, directly from a neighboring homeowner. Oh, that's okay. But I can,
Other questions? Board Member Frazee, Vice Chair Frazee, let's be correct.
That's fine. Again, thank you for attending. I guess just for a comment as well, the next step with this is actually getting a use permit, so that is still another public process that has to go through.
Correct.
For
Correct.
that. Are there specific plans for the property next door to this? I guess that lot 003, which is the lot you own, is that?
it's a residential lot. So is the lot next door, which the applicant is building on, which is, it's deed restricted and no one knows how it ever became
Residential.
commercial. And I understand your job is not to enforce deed restrictions. They're private, but you can let them speak on behalf of this neighborhood. And that you're allowed to do. Let them, it be a document, they're publicly recorded, they can speak on the character of the neighborhood. And the variance specifically, on the case Darren likes to mention so often in this meeting tonight, there's specifically, the court says, well, if it affects it negative, the character of the neighborhood negatively, then that's a reason not to grant the variance. And before that case, you couldn't do the self-imposed variance. There's something I need to bring up before I forget. The garbage truck thing is very disturbing. If you look in the emails, or the chain that was in the staff summary report, the solid waste management drove through that driveway with no problem. There are other emails where she said, "Are you sure?" equivalent of that. I might not be quoting exactly, but, and then they went hunting for other burdens to put upon this applicant after they purchased the property. It's disturbing. There's so many disturbing things going on here, I don't know where to go. And that's why I said, at least give me a continuance to figure out what's going on here. It's extremely disturbing, I'm being very kind saying misrepresentations. The way the applicant and Darren Tender and staff have worked on this, there's an Ms. Kaminsky said this was not rushed. I have an email that you have, or I definitely quoted it, where city staff says this is being rushed. And I feel like I'm being rushed, like I'm in a basketball game, the shot clock's off, I'm the only person on defense, and there's a team of people going across the court to get the parking variance. Because once that goes through, that's why I'm asking it to stop, because once that goes through, it's almost impossible. Yes, there's another design review commission or whatever after. There are other things. But this applicant is very sophisticated, and but there have been actual lies and deletions going on.
Okay,
which is
Mr.
wrong.
Arcules,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think you're getting pretty far from the question
Okay,
here.
thank you. Okay.
Okay.
I'm a little bereaved too, just seeing, I've had a loss in the family, and it's tough. I really don't want to be here tonight, and either did any of my wife, and she was kind enough to join us, so I apologize about that, and I apologize if anything seems, this is just so, Tempe needs to change. I mean, the simplest thing is, I don't know why an applicant is taking notes at a meeting where they're the one that are asking for things. It's
Okay, well,
beyond me.
let's
go
be
on, go
careful
on.
of getting
Okay.
into the weeds there.
okay.
I will say, I think that I can speak on behalf of the board when I do express my condolences for your loss.
Okay, thank you.
And appreciate your being here as part of this process despite challenging circumstances. I have a couple of questions, but again, I defer to the rest of the board. Any more questions for Mr. Arcules? Okay, so if you would indulge me a little more. We are here tonight to consider variance on parking. We are not here to consider whether this becomes a Del Taco.
I'm on board with you 100%.
Okay, so,
We can stick to parking, and the board does
Right.
not have to grant parking when the
Right,
city
so-
is scheming with the applicant to put a burden on them for. to
well,
justify-
now,
Okay.
I'm not going to,
Okay.
I'm not going to follow that path about scheming,
Okay.
because I know city staff pretty well, and I've sat on a lot of meetings, and I'm quite convinced they're not scheming with any applicants. We really are interested in an objective read of the rules and are things working the way is best for the city. So what we're here to consider tonight is this parking variance. And there are two options. One is we can say, no, you will have to provide the required amount of parking for whatever it is you build, or two, yes, we grant you a variance that you will be able to build this project with a little less parking than would otherwise be required. Neither of those will change whether this becomes a Del Taco or not.
I agree, but if you grant a variance, you are putting a burden on the residents, specifically the single-family homes on Weber Drive, on
In what
parking.
way?
In what way? Because
If there's a
one-
Del Taco with 24 as
let's not
opposed
even
to 26
let-
spaces, how is that a
because
different burden?
If somebody, this is a 24-hour place, but let's just go on about that. Somebody pulls along Weber Drive, they hop out of their car, they're in front of Mildred Bourne's house, who is taking care of her grandchildren, raising, by the way, in raising her children. She is they're putting a burden on her when her daughter comes to get the children. So you are shifting a burden from the applicant, you're giving the applicant something, and you're shifting a burden onto a single-family home adjacent to a restaurant. I won't call it a Del Taco.
So may I restate then? Are
yeah.
you suggesting that by allowing them to have less parking, that will lead to on-street parking, which is a problem?
Correct.
Okay, that's fair.
So that specifically, yeah, you're shifting the burden, you're giving the applicant something, you're shifting the burden to the residents along Weber Drive, and there's more, you have multiple letters from them. There's another family next door that is raising children too, and you have multiple people who specifically mention the parking in this case, not Del Taco, but specifically mentioned, not just me. So that's my
Okay.
point. And
So
I was asking for just a continuance, just to get somebody to look at this, because now we have the applicant, we're down to 2 spots. Well, how do we know that? Well, it'd be nice to have a traffic engineer or somebody like that look at it, or, a parking engineer.
Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Hercules, I appreciate the zealousness. The purpose of this board and the investigations of staff is to vet these decisions. And I appreciate that you feel you haven't had full opportunity to vet it, but that responsibility falls to this board.
Okay.
And so what we want to do is just look at the facts that are germane to this variance.
Okay.
On occasion on these meetings, I've seen people get a little bit into the weeds and the forensics of,
Okay.
hey, this is the process, and somebody said something, and this
Okay,
wasn't
well,
recorded
yeah,
correctly.
I just
If
didn't-
you'll,
okay,
just
sorry.
a moment, please. But none of those things really matter. What really matters in the end are the 4 conditions for the variance.
Correct.
And the one thing that I'm looking for are clear and objectively provable facts that show there's an issue with one of those 4. And the one thing that I've heard that I think is something we should be considering is granting the variance could cause a parking issue on that street.
Correct. Very good.
Is there another issue that you want to put on that board that
Well,
I've
right
missed?
now, we are just with the parking variance, so I like the way, and I want to stick on topic like you've said, so I don't drift off, and I agree with you, but there's a misrepresentation too. I actually know, I spoke with a Del Taco owner, and the number of employees they even implied was incorrect. Things like that are very disturbing to me, but an actual owner-operator that I know. So, yeah, parking is important here, and I'm trying to stick on parking. And I asked him specifically. That's why I was on my phone there. I was going through my text messages. I said, "How many, employees?" And the number was 8. So for this size. So, and I think they said 6 or something like that. But so yeah, it is going to shift the parking by giving a reduction in parking, because there is going to be no way to have code enforcement out there. These people work. Mildred takes care of her, not only her grandchild, her great-grandchildren. They're not going to be able to. They're not calling code enforcement.
Okay.
It is going to be a negative effect on the character of the neighborhood, which is the
Okay,
reason
so,
that, yeah.
so
Okay,
we've got
sorry.
that parking issue. No, thank you for indulging me there.
Thank you.
I would advise you on some of these other issues to come to the DRC meeting. You'll You and I will speak again then if you come, because I'm also the chair of that one.
Oh, wow.
But the rest of the
Thank you,
board.
thank you, everybody here. Listen, I know you all volunteer, I appreciate that, and I know it's not,
Well,
it-
we're
it's-
all interested in getting it right.
Okay.
But at that meeting, we can discuss a number of other issues that will be germane there. I
Okay.
advise you to do that if that's something you're interested in. And I think we'll thank you for bringing the
Okay.
concern about the parking.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, or,
Well, any more questions, board members?
okay, thank you for hearing me.
All right, thank you. All right, so that's what I like about our process, is we get to air everything out. All right, so, Ms. Sender, if you'd like to respond to any of the things you've heard?
Thank you. Just a couple of things. Just technical aspect on the stipulation, we certainly agree to the removal of stipulation 2A, because we have reduced it down to the 2 parking space variance.
Do you mean 2B, I
Is
assume?
it 2B? Is it 2A? Is it 2B? Okay, 2B, the one that requested the 150 feet.
Right.
So we certainly would like that, because we just simply can't eliminate 150 feet from the building. In terms of the site itself, again, a restaurant is allowed in CSS zoning. We could have a restaurant here with however many parking spaces, very similar operation. And I certainly cannot see a reduction of 2 parking spaces creating a disparate impact on that street. Certainly, part of our use permit review would be that if there are any nuisances that arise from the operation of the building, that anyone can call code enforcement, and that use permit is at risk. That's a huge problem. We're going to be looking for that. My client is going to be looking for that. They're not going to risk their use permit because somebody would be parking on the street. I don't see that happening anyway. We're talking 2 parking spaces. But it would be something that the restaurant itself would be policing, as well as the city. Obviously, this has been a 2.5-year process. Mr. Hercules was involved from 2017, aware of our plans, aware of certain layouts that we were proposing, having his property in escrow at the time. So I don't know how rushed that is. I'm not happy he feels rushed. But we would definitely request that we move forward tonight and not continue this case. Let's see, what else? I think that's all I have at this point right now. Do you have any questions, any further questions for me?
Vice Chair Frazee.
So just to be clear then, and maybe this is just me, but you're agreeing that you're going to certify the square footage because you're removing this 2B, which was a requirement to reduce the square footage.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair Frazee, yes. In fact, in my presentation, if you can pull that up, I don't know if we need to, but I have a drawing in there I didn't show you because it was at the back. It shows the measurement to the outside wall, which is what they were using before, and then it shows a measurement to the inside wall, which is basically the airspace of the shell. And that was done by our architect. And that exhibit will be part of it. The construction drawings obviously have to be certified. And that's actually why I'm asking for 2, not 1, because if anything was off a few inches, we're okay still. If it didn't work, we'd have to come back to you and ask for another parking variance for another space.
Thank you.
Okay, Board Member Baker.
I have just a couple follow-up questions. I know we kind of touched on this, and there's just been so much information. Directly across north of Weber on Scottsdale Road, what's on that corner?
Mr. Chair, Board Member Baker, there's a convenience store.
And directly south on Scottsdale Road, that's other commercial property. If I was understanding you correctly, they were grandfathered in, their parking is much smaller, much more reduced. Thank you for clarifying that, and I guess my next follow-up thought would then go more to the city. Are we having issues with those other commercial properties, people parking on Weber?
To my knowledge, we have not had any calls of complaint about parking on Weber associated with the commercial uses.
Thank you. And again, we're talking about a convenience store like Circle K or something. It sells alcohol. Cars come and go really quick through it. And okay, thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to get in my head. I appreciate the time.
All right, any more questions for the applicant? Okay,
Thank you.
I think we'll thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have another question for staff, if I may. So we've had some musings about signage on Weber saying no parking, and I know you already answered this, but I just want to poke that one again. If we were interested in assuring that there's some kind of signage that says there's no parking, what recourses, if any, does this board have?
As much as planning has, which is none, because it's in the right-of-way and it's traffic engineering's purview. So we were looking at the aerial of that area. I was trying to bring up an aerial, but I don't think we have one that's clear enough to show that. There is a bike lane that starts on Weber Drive, and so there's actually restriction of parking. Do you want to put that up? Maybe Ryan can put it up. So there's a natural restriction by the current design of the street, but anytime signage is put on the street, it has to comply with traffic engineering standards. So they would determine where signage was appropriate. So I would again defer to them for that. If we can pull up that aerial, it'll show you where the bike lane starts. So you can see in front of these two lots, 1 and 2, there is no on-street parking by design, and then you've got the bike lane that veers off, and that kind of creates the natural pocket where cars can park on the street.
So you say it creates a pocket where cars can park.
You see where the car is parked in front of the house there? on the
Yes.
south side.
Are you saying it is legal for them to park there?
They are allowed to park there, but if you move further further west, you see where there's the bike lane tapers and gets closer to the curb
And there's no room to park there without being on top of the bike
a
lane
bike
or
lane.
that lane of traffic?
Correct, so that naturally prevents, it's illegal to park in a bike lane. So if traffic engineering felt there was a need to add signage, that would be part of their design, and where they would place that signage would be up to them.
All right. All right, well, it sounds like that's off the table for us to pursue any kind of option there.
Could I entertain one design thing that might
Oh.
address Mr. Jeremy Arcules' concern?
Please.
The pathway that connects from the parking area to the front of the building is shown as a striped line on the pavement, which is a normal way of showing pedestrian crossing of a drive aisle. That can be designed as a table where the sidewalk is flush and raised, which elevates both pedestrians, children, and people in wheelchairs to a higher level. It also prevents cars from crossing into that painted zone because they have to come up over a ramped area like a table and then go back down. So that is something that we could discuss as part of the design of the site to address that concern for safety.
And that would be a DRC matter?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Kaminsky. All right. Mr. Abramson.
Very quickly, with regard to on-street parking, if there is an issue, the neighborhood could request permit parking in that area. So that's an option.
Okay. Okay, good to know. Let me talk to you afterwards if you have a question, all right? Because I'm afraid that I'm not allowed to breach process. Okay, board members, time for our opinions and discussion and then a motion. So let's be vocal this time and express a couple of opinions on where you stand and why. Board Member Baker.
I personally think that there are other issues that will be handled elsewhere. Like I said that in the beginning, I believe we're here for a very specific purpose. I do believe that they meet our criteria. We've always been very clear about what they have to do. We have our 4 things we can look at. There are people, there are other businesses right there that have this. They're already enjoying this. They're doing everything they can to make it fit into what we have right now. And I'm sorry, but there was a Jack in Box there, and that was a horrible design. And, I mean, it just is gone now. I would much rather see a viable business that could be right on Scottsdale Road, right where it is commercially zoned, trying to fit into what our requirements are as a city, not just in parking, but also the landscaping and the beautification we require. They're doing the bus stop. They're doing these little things that actually do contribute to our neighborhood. They're providing a job that contributes to our neighborhood. There's some very good things here. 2 parking spaces less, to me, is not going to create such an issue. Instead, I believe it does go against them when we have these other commercial properties right there enjoying that. I believe that 2 spaces is a reasonable request. That's my thought process in listening to every single thing here. I think there are other things that have to be vetted out in other meetings, but this one for parking, I think we would be wrong in not doing our jobs if we did not give this to them.
Okay. Other thoughts? Vice Chair Frazee.
I'm basically reiterating with the summary of what Member Baker just said. I agree with those statements, and I think that the applicant and the city has definitely answered the questions that I've had in regards to the process and the application.
Okay. Other comments? Board Member Collins.
I also believe that the applicant has met the requirements for the variance. And again, it's already been said here, but taking into account just how much impact 2 additional cars would have on the street. I just can't see that as a large impact here. And then also, Mr. Ayers mentioned that you could, possibly turn this into permit parking. And looking at the space there, it's a vacant lot right next to her anyway. So if those 2 spaces were overflowed, I would assume they'd overflow on the vacant spot, out in front of the vacant lot. So that's kind of the way I'm leaning.
Board Member Noggle, you've been quiet all night. What do you think?
Well, I'm a resident of North Tempe, and I'm pretty familiar. I live a mile or 2 from this location, and I go to some of these restaurants, and so I have some personal familiarity with parking and parking challenges in that area. And I can tell you that there's a restaurant right across the street where I think there's probably 20 to 30 parking spots. I've never seen more than 4 vehicles in there at one time. I'm also familiar with that Jack in the Box that's south of there, and I just looked, and they've got 15 parking spots for this right on what's that street just north of 202? Yeah.
Curry.
I mean, it's a small parcel, and they've got a Jack in the Box there, and traffic works pretty smoothly, and I've never seen more than 2 or 3 cars parked there at any given time. So that's just my reference point, having had a few hamburgers up there.
Well, I'm getting hungry talking about hamburgers. All right. Board Member Confer, you want to jump in?
I just wanted to say thank you to city staff for working on this for so long. I think they did a real good job. The applicant and presentation was excellent, and I really appreciate the property owners coming out, taking part of the process, submitting emails, public information requests. I think it makes the whole process a lot more transparent, so thank you all. And I will support a motion to accept the variance with the modified stipulations that we talked about.
Okay. So my turn, I guess. So to get right to the chase, I support the application as well. The 4 criteria, I think, have been shown to us as clearly as possible. There are special circumstances, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're there. On to the concerns, though. I've had similar concerns about projects. The Jack in the Box on Broadway and Priest, I gave that application a hard time at DRC because, well, sure, I mean, the drive-through is right here between the restaurant and the parking, and aren't people going to cross that? And I've raised those issues before and gone to bat against that kind of thing, and I've been assured that it works that way just about every time. And when I stop to think about it, it would be hard to have a drive-through where that didn't happen, because the drive-through usually circles the building at least part way. And I can't think of any particular one where that doesn't happen in our city. And matter of fact, I can think of a few projects that I ended up approving that worked that way. And I haven't heard of accidents happening at them. It doesn't mean it hasn't happened. But I want you to know that we do hear those concerns. At all kinds of cases, people come and say, well, this project is going to lead to more traffic, and I'm worried about what that does to the neighborhood. I hear that concern probably at least once a month over the last 6 years. And that is a concern, and our traffic engineers look diligently at what the traffic patterns are going to do, and, well, I guess I just want to make sure that I take the time to say, I take that concern seriously, and we've certainly heard it before. You're not alone in having those concerns. We share concerns about safety. In general, we do end up leaning towards let's develop things, but try to develop them smart. So we're going to discuss some of these issues again at DRC, I think, where they're going to have to demonstrate that those things work correctly. But here we're considering the parking variance, which I'm of a mind that saying they can do it with 2 less parking spaces is not going to drive people to park on Weber because they want Del Taco so badly. I wouldn't do that. If Del Taco was full, I'd get frustrated and go to the next place down the street. So, having said that, I'm going to be in support of it. Can we have a motion, please? And when you make your motion, keep in mind that we probably want to make that motion as amended by staff, removing condition 2B. You may not want to make your motion that way. It's a free country. Vice Chair Frazee.
I make a motion to approve the variance requested as amended by staff.
Do I hear a second?
I second the motion.
All right, motion to approve the application as amended by staff from Vice Chair Frazee and seconded by Board Member Baker. All those in favor by show of hands, please. And that leaves none for opposed. The motion passes 6-0. And we do thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That's our final item. So do we have any announcements from staff? Okay. Vice Chair reminds me of the appeal process. Mr. Abramson, would you like to enlighten us on that, please?
Thank you, Chair Lyon. Thank you, Vice Chair Frazee. The appeals process, should anyone be aggrieved to this decision this evening, would be to file an application for an appeal with Maricopa County Superior Court within 30 days.
Okay. Any additional announcements from staff regarding upcoming cases or any such?
We have no cases for next month.
Okay.
However, we are looking at the potential in January for a Board of Adjustment retreat.
Huh. Looking forward to that. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.